Hello and welcome. Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Leslie Hendrickson. I'm on the steering committee of the Newburyport Literary Festival. This was our 19th year, and this is the final session of our weekend. We were in person Friday night and all day yesterday, which was wonderful. And this is our 6th session online today, which has also been fabulous. I do want to quickly thank our founding sponsors, the Newburyport Bank and the Institute for Savings. Without these organizations, the festival would not be able to come to you every year. So we thank them so much, as well as the Mass Cultural Council, which supports us in many ways as well. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Sam, who is going to introduce the rest of our guests. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a great podcast and session.
Howdy, everybody. This is Sam Pfeifle, and once again, you have drifted your way into John Updike's Coast, your favorite little podcast about reading, writing, literature, bookstores, and all things awesome. Today, it is a very special treat. We are coming to you as part of the Newburyport Literary Festival, which we have just heard is in its 19th year, which is amazing. That's much longer than we've owned a bookstore, but we are very happy to be a part of it. And also special is that not only am I joined today by the wonderful, lovely, and talented Hannah Harlow, my co-owner at the bookshop of Beverly Farms, but also by Jami Attenberg and Steve Almond, a pair of writers who are joining us here for the Newburyport Literary Festival to talk about their books, but also just to talk about what they're reading, like we always do here on John Updike's Ghost. Jami Attenberg is the author most recently of 1,000 Words, which is a book about getting your act together and stop giving yourself any excuses for not writing, based out of her 1,000 Words of Summer, which you may have seen on Twitter. And she is going to talk about that and all the rest of the stuff that comes into her brain. And Steve is also the author of a new book on the craft of writing called Truth is the Arrow, Mercy is the Bow. And we're excited to talk about how to write, how to read, and whatever else comes into our brains. And as always, we normally have an agenda here on John Updike's Ghost. We are very eager to make sure you know what is coming. But today, we're just going to kind of let it rip a little bit and start out with the fact that Hannah has been reading both of your books. She has them there at the bookshop. And I'm going to open the discussion with you, Hannah. Tell us about the experience of reading these books. And then Steve and Jami can talk about your experience.
Well, some of our longtime listeners know that I also write, so I was thrilled to dive into these books. They're both craft books, right? And Jami and Steve, you guys have been writing for a long time, and we're going to ask you in a little bit why now was the right time for a craft book. But so first I want to talk about Steve's book, which has lots of different chapters on different topics. One of my favorites is like how to write a good sex scene or not, maybe how to write a bad sex scene. One of the things I liked that we get throughout the book is the fact that Steve writes about failure. And is very honest about like not everything always works out when you're a writer. I think that's a super important lesson for like young writers to just process and know from the beginning that there's going to be obviously a ton of rejection, but also that like some of our stories are maybe never going to see the light of day. So Steve, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like how you deal with failure as a writer, or like what do you tell your students about it?
Yeah, I think you got it. I mean, it's it's just like unless you're extraordinarily talented and lucky, and I guess like just start at a remarkably high level, like you're going to go through an apprenticeship and you're going to write a bunch of work that's like important for you to write, but it's not destined to find readers and probably isn't ready to find readers. And I've gone through that process a ton and thought maybe Jami has the same experience, just, thought, okay, I'll have a book by this age and then, I'll be able to write. For me, a novel was the big thing I was chasing always, and I'll have a novel by this age, and just failed over and over and over again, never hit any of those deadlines, went through these periods of rejection and then writer's block. And at the time, it seemed very dire and inefficient and awful. And now I just go, okay, that was the journey. And in fact, the writer's block was really great and important and helpful. It stripped me of a lot of foolish ideas about what I was meant to write and got me asking like much more useful questions like, what do I want to write? Or even what do I feel capable of writing right now? And yeah, I mean, you got two choices. You can sort of be ashamed of your failure and hide it away, or assume a posture of entitlement, like it's the world's fault that your work isn't getting published. And that's okay, you can do that, but I don't think you're going to last creatively. The other attitude is to sort of try to move through humiliation into some kind of posture of humility, like, oh, okay, those decisions I made creatively at that time were not the strongest, most dramatically satisfying, truthful decisions I could have made. It's okay. Doesn't mean I don't have a right to tell the story and give it another shot. And let me look at those efforts and see what I can learn from them. And that's, I think, kind of what failure's there for, is to try to help you get better.
Steve, am I right that the How to Write Sex Teens piece first appeared in the Boston Phoenix?
Well, you're right that.
Did you write that piece? Like, it was like 2003. I want to ask, so I was in the Portland Phoenix at that time, and I loved your work back then, and we would reprint it sometimes in Portland. I think I sent you checks for like $10 because Portland was so small compared to Boston. But I felt like that was like a really great time of the Phoenix, and you were like, it was super hot from like 01 to 05. And I don't know, but sometimes I go look at that, and it was definitely a different style of writing. So was that piece brought all the way into this book, or did you have to change it a lot, or what did you do?
Yeah, no, it would be like sort of saying, oh, you know, that amoeba, you know, now is that the same thing as the, you know, current, I don't know what, Jaguar or something, but I, I, I don't think anything from that original column made it into the final version of this piece. Well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe some things did. There's like a little bit of common DNA, but I've had a long time to write a lot of bad sex scenes in between, and to think about why people are jammed up and why they get performance anxiety around writing sex scenes. But it's a good way of saying this book is not like coming out of nowhere. I've been at work on it in one way or another for, you know, 3 decades probably.
Hannah, you're on mute. We knew this was going to happen. I told you
I
not to hit
know.
that button. Don't hit that button. Let
I
it
won't
roll.
ever do that again. I do want to talk about Jami's book. So it's called 1000 Words. Jami, just in case people don't know what the 1000 Words community is, will you just like briefly bring everybody up to speed about how that started?
Yeah, it's something that was started in 2018 that I wasn't trying to necessarily start anything. But a friend and I decided we were going to write 1000 words a day for 2 weeks straight, like do a little boot camp just to sort of get ourselves going on our projects. And I just tweeted about it because I'm a fairly online person, and all these people that day said, I want to do it too. So I just set up a little mailing list, people sign up, and I think we had like 200 people sign up the first day. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to write a letter to everyone, and I'll ask other writer friends to write letters too. And so by the end of the first year, we had about 2,000 people who were doing it. And we decided to call it 1000 Words of Summer. And people would check in at the end of the day using that hashtag on Twitter, back when Twitter was Twitter. And I did it just that first year, and then the next year came around, I was like, oh, I guess I'll do it again. And every year was like 5,000 people, 10,000 people, and it just sort of kept building. And I kept asking, you know, different writer friends to write letters for it. So this community, and then I, you know, have a Slack for it, and people would join in there and kind of cheer each other on. And so it's just been this incredible thing where, I mean, this year we're up to about 40,000 people. And it's I don't know, it's really like wonderful. Like people have written books, gotten book deals, gotten agents, built cohorts, written their master's thesis, written screenplays, things like that. So there's just like this lovely, you know, and there's only so much I can do. I sort of like create the structure, meaning I send out the emails and sort of monitor the community, but you can't really monitor that many. After the first year, it was sort of all over. You can't really monitor that many people, but I just try to give it my best spirit, and I think the people who contribute to it are excited to be there. And And yeah, and so it's just been a really neat thing that's come out of it.
Yeah, it's awesome. I get the newsletters. I think I did participate one summer, but I mean, what you've created is amazing. So the book captures a lot of the letters that other writers have written for the newsletters with lots of different types of advice. But then you've also written a lot of, and there's like a lengthier intro, but then you have like micro essays in there too.
For sure. Yeah. It's like a hybrid anthology craft motivational book. I mean, it was not something that I was really, I mean, Steve said it was something that he was writing all along, and I don't even think I was writing it all along. I just was sparingly doing it. I hate when people send me emails that I haven't feel like I haven't signed up for. So I only really was doing it like, if you signed up for it, and I was very like precious about I'm protective of people's time and things like that. But then I think it was after the 5th year, I just thought, I think I understand what this is and how to talk about it. And I felt like I could do a book maybe. And what I did was I took all the letters that existed from all the past authors and I just dumped them into a Word document and I read them all, one after another. And it supercharged me and made me feel like I could write something about it. And I thought if that did that to me, and I'm somebody who motivates other people, like who motivates the motivator, do you know what I mean? Then I thought it would be helpful for other people. So, and so then I sold that idea. And then my editor said, there needs to be more of you in it. So I wrote a little bit more of me in it, and my ideas, but it ended up being really like a great, fun, interesting writing experience. And it's, yeah, it's been a joy to actually to tour for it and talk about it and put it out into the world because I'm not somebody who teaches very often. Very rarely do I teach, and I don't know if this is like teaching exactly, but it is about encouraging people, and I do like to do that.
I mean, I know you have a lot of writer friends, but did you know everybody who contributed, or were you sometimes like cold calling people you were excited
I would
about?
say in that book, I think I probably have met almost everybody in person before. And I wouldn't say they're all my best friends, although I would like to be best friends with them.
Sure.
But I did know a lot of them, but I have been publishing, my first book came out in 2006. So I've hit a lot of literary festivals. I've done a lot of tours. I met Steve through that. And we did an event a very long time ago in Boston together, which he was nice enough to join me for. And yeah, you just kind of meet people. And I'm also like, like I said, I'm a pretty online person. I definitely have some people that I reached out to, I think in particular this year that I've never met before. And sometimes they say yes. I get lucky and they say yes. Now it's like people know what it is. Used to be like cold call.
Yeah.
But,
well, so you're both part of communities, right? That's what you're both saying. Like you've been around, you've written books, you do events, you meet other writers. How does that affect what you read? Because I want to talk, I mean, like, we talk about reading. Like, you obviously get asked to blurb books, right? And you read for your own writing and you have writer friends who you want to support. So do you sometimes struggle to be like, I actually want to read this book and I've got these other obligations?
I mean, I sometimes am trying to read things like a year or two after they come out because I feel like the hype sort of overwhelms me. Like I just read The Candy House, Jennifer Egan's book, which I think came out like 2 years ago, maybe, or a year and a half, or something like that. And I was like, and I was really excited to read it when it came out. And then I was like, oh, I don't actually want to hear what anyone else has to say about it. And so I just sat on it and just recently read it instead myself because I just wanted to have my own personal, because I had loved Visit from the Goon Squad so much. And so I was like, and I read a lot of I read a lot of her books and I'm a fan. So I sometimes just sit and wait. That's the magic of books, is that they are eternal. It doesn't matter when you read them.
Right. They're sometimes new to you, but they've been out for a long time. Steve, what about you?
Yeah, I think I read very spottily, and oftentimes, to be honest, I read because I lead book groups and because I'm preparing, a class, or because I have a friend who has a book coming out, or I've been asked to do an event and I really want to read the book and study it. So I like that though. I like reading kind of as a writer a bit. And I don't know about you, Jamie, I mark the shit out of books and have a lot of pages tagged. And, I want to sort of understand what decisions the writer is making and, the mechanisms of enthrallment for particular books. So when I read stuff, I like doing that kind of careful read. I'll reread stuff. I probably read Meg Wolitzer's The Wife like 15 times. I've read Stoner like 150 times, and A Burning by Meg Majumdar. That's one of my favorite novels. I've read that a few times. And Memorial Drive, the Natasha Trethewey memoir, read that immediately after finishing it. So there are books that I'll read sort of just because they enthrall me, but I like the process of having kind of an assignment to figure out why a book is exciting and what it's up to.
Yeah, and both of you guys are writers in lots of places. You do essays, you do memoir type stuff, you do teachery type stuff, you do novels. I feel like that's a different type of writer than, some of these people at the literary festival, they just put out novels, right? Like you don't see a lot of essays, you don't see a magazine stuff. Do you think that affects the way you read? Like I feel like I read more tactically because I want to know all the different ways that people are publishing. Do you think like, oh, that's a kind of new way to get writing out there that I hadn't really thought about? Do you read a lot of magazine-y type stuff, in chunks, or are you like a novelist type person, Jamie?
I mean, I like reading novels. I like being captivated by a story. I consider myself primarily a novelist, although I do these other things. I mean, I've written 8 novels, so that's like where my main energy is going.
With a
And then
ninth coming out, right?
or no, the 8th is coming out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because
Oh.
and so that's what I'm doing is trying to practice that kind of craft. But once a year, when I do this 1,000 words of summer stuff, for example, I might be reading things that are sort of more spiritual or motivational or about energy or things like that has sort of can sustain me for the project and supporting all of these people. I just did like subscribe to a bunch of literary magazines. Like I go through these phases where I want to read them and then I just unsubscribe because they stack up. But I just subscribed again to the Paris Review and it's awesome. Like it's just such a solid, like there's so many interesting things in it and it's really beautifully made. And so I do like that experience of reading a really beautifully made literary magazine. And I get a lot of online. I'm like very distracted by the online world. That is like my biggest challenge. So, but when I get up every day, I try to read, the book that I'm reading, whatever it is, for, an hour a day, and that fuels my writing. There's a direct correlation between what I'm reading and how I'm writing that day.
You feel the same way, Steve? Are you reading something that fuels your writing?
Probably in the big picture, like I think of it, like if you're gonna, I don't know, run a 10K or whatever it is, like you've got a carbo load, like I think you've got to read in order to sort of be inspired and also get some energy from another writer's accomplishment, how vividly they're writing, how truthfully sort of you can't, and I'm sure Jamie, I mean, I do a lot of teaching, so you can kind of tell when people don't when they aren't reading, you're like, this is not going to go well for you. Like you have to have a reading practice. It doesn't have to be intense and monastic, but I think you have to be absorbing writing and stories in that way if you want to be able to produce them with any competence. And I don't I would say that I familiarize myself with a whole bunch of different kinds of writing just because of the nature of my teaching, because I teach at the Neiman Foundation, which is for journalists, half of whom are foreign born and half of whom are American. And I have to find essays for them to read and journalism and creative nonfiction of various sorts that goes beyond Didion and Baldwin and all the greats. And then I ask them to also bring in their favorite stuff. And so then they're introducing me to all this stuff, oftentimes writers who are, again, foreign born that I probably never would have discovered otherwise. And, it's all amazing and inspiring. There's so many people doing remarkable work, and people you've never heard of who were writing 30 years ago in then Czechoslovakia who are blowing your mind. You know, it's like it's an endless trove.
Actually, Steve, that's one of the things sorry, go ahead,
I was
Jamie.
just going to say there are so many books.
There's maybe too many. I don't know. But Steve, that's one of the things I liked about your book was all the books you referenced were like super varied in terms of who was writing them, when they were being written. So it's clear that you're just reading constantly and staying kind of on top of what's coming out.
Yeah, that's actually not clear. I faked you out. That's not really the way it works. But when I do read something, I'm thinking about it deeply and I'm wanting to figure out, like I hate books that sort of say, okay, plot or, or chronology, here's how you do it. And it speaks in abstract ways rather than saying, okay, here's how here's how you introduce multiple timelines. Let's watch Cheryl Strayed do that in these 3 paragraphs. Like I just feel like you have to be concrete, or it's so much more effective if you're concrete. And so, yeah, for me, that was part of the exciting, part of what made writing the book exciting was just being able to draw all these examples like I would in a classroom or at a conference and say, this isn't mystical. It's not some sort of hidden equation that you have to apply to the monk for. You can see people making these good decisions around plot or characterization or chronology. Here's what it looks like.
That's interesting because we try to talk about that a lot with the books that we're reading, right? So we take all kinds of stuff into the store and we try to read most of it, right? Even if it's not to our taste or whatever. And so we try to talk as much as possible about, that old Updike way of reviewing books is try to figure out what they're trying to do and then how successful they are at doing it, right? And so that's what I'm kind of constantly trying to figure out is what kind of book is this? And what are they trying to accomplish? You don't necessarily know. Last week I was reading that Christine Ma Kellum's book, The Band, and it's about like this K-pop star who comes to live with a psychology professor that looks a lot like she is. And, I didn't necessarily like the book, but I was like, oh, I've never seen anybody kind of try to do this before. Like it didn't make sense to me, but I was sort of heightened by it because I was like, oh, this is interesting. It's so weird that it took me a long time to figure out. And I enjoyed that a lot. And I think probably, both of you read kind of similarly in that it's not sometimes so much that the book isn't well done. It's just not doing anything new and different. And sometimes I kind of move on. So I'm interested, like, Jamie, do you find like you like classic stories, or are you kind of hunting like original stuff that you're like, oh, I hadn't thought to do that before?
So I love debuts. And I like to see what the kids are doing. Because I want to know how things are evolving, and I want to know, and there's all different kinds of voices that are getting represented now, I think a little bit more than they used to be, I'm hoping, or I'm seeking them out, or, but that's what I look for, and that's what I hunger for. And so I think that's what I'm attracted to, and that's what I'm trying to get information a lot of the time.
Have you read anything recently you're excited about? That's a debut or whatever.
That's a debut. I mean, I loved Sarah Matthews, All This Could Be, I forgot it's the same as mine. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think
it came out, what?
Sarah
You know what I'm talking
Matthews?
about? Yeah. All This Could Be Easier, Different. All This Could Be Different. Sorry. Brain gone, toast. Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
All This Could Be Different. That is like a really great example of something that I read, and I was like, it was like a National Book Award finalist, and I just thought it was like incredibly fresh and revolutionary, and it was I don't know, I just hadn't read anything like it before. I really loved it, and I was like, and also I felt like it was like inspiring to me politically. And it just came out at a really great time. And I don't know. So like, that's a really good example of like, oh, I have a long way to go, a lot of things to learn in my life. So yeah, I mean, I'm just reading all different kinds of stuff. Now, sometimes what I'll do is I'll read the first 50 pages, I will admit.
For sure.
I'm a big
do that all the time. Yeah.
I'm a big first 50. debuts can sometimes be imperfect, or sometimes you can learn a lot just from those first 50 pages. And I want to know what, I don't know, I kind of want to know what's going on. I just kind of want to like be a part of the conversation, but I'm more than happy to be caught up and swept away in things. I think that just like a good sentence is going to make me really happy. I think that somebody being true to their voice is going to remind me to be true to my voice. I think I take really simple things out of it. I'm not actually like I wouldn't consider what I write in 1,000 words or even in my newsletter necessarily like hardcore craft kind of stuff. And which is probably very different than what Steve, it sounds like what Steve is doing. I'm really into like an intuitive writer, and I just don't think about craft really specifically in those kinds of ways. So I get really like inspired by vibe, I would say.
Vibe. I like that. What about you, Steve? Are you like hunting new stuff? Like I do this in music too. Like I go back and forth between, craving originality, and then I just want something I can sing along to, and I do the same thing with books. It's like I crave originality, and then it's like I just want a detective fiction that like wraps up nicely.
Mhm.
What do you find yourself like hunting out?
Well, yeah, I mean, hunting is like it's all very random and kind of what's coming up and what comes across my transom. I wish I had, I don't know, like time to wander through a wonderful independent bookstore every week, but that's just not my life right now. But I will say, since we're talking about debuts and books that are unusual and you haven't seen anything like it, I do have Show and Tell, which is
Oh,
this fascinating novel, Bunyan and Henry or the Beautiful Destiny, which is totally unlike anything. Jimmy, I don't know if you've heard of this book. It's totally unlike anything I've ever read. And it's like a parable, and it's about Paul Bunyan and John Henry. So it's, I guess, speculative fiction, but it's also an historical novel, but it's also weirdly a novel that's kind of a political allegory. So it's about extractive capitalism and white nationalism and sort of America's past and its future. And it's just a mind trip. I loved it. It was very, but also completely unlike the stuff I write, and I couldn't even imagine writing anything like it. So I guess that I do find that incredibly exciting when you're like, this is not my jam. I don't do this. I don't know how to do it. I have no clue, but I'm thrilled somebody's doing it. So I really like that. It's a debut novel, and I'm going to talk with the author, Mark Cecil, in a couple of days. And then tomorrow, this is like the version of the sing along like Taylor Swift novel. I don't know if you guys have read this yet, The Ferris by Kate DiCamillo. She wrote Because Winn-Dixie and Tales
oh
of
yeah.
Despero. And I mean, this book friggin' lit me up. It is like reading E.B. White and Kurt Vonnegut, like having a little love baby. It's so beautiful and simple and direct and such efficiency, the way it moves, and such emotional generosity to it. And it's simple. I think it's considered YA, but it's like YA, like Huck Finn is YA, or Catcher in the Rye. It's like, okay, sure, it's YA, but Charlotte's Web. It's like the book has been around for 100 years. It feels that natural and lived in and emotionally kind of available to the reader. I just was blown away by it.
Cool. I think we actually have that book in our middle grade section.
was
So we
about
put a
to
lot of
say, yeah.
those types of books in like what we just call kids fiction. Like they're these like
Mhm.
timeless classics. So maybe we'll move it there, but that's a book I've been eyeing. So I'm
Oh,
happy.
it's so good. And it's
Oh.
just a cupcake. I mean, you'll be through it in, it's really quick read, but also just deeply moving, and just one of those books like Charlotte's Web where you're like, how is this person casting this spell so quickly and so well? And it's all the characters are immediately round, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah, we were a
Cool.
big Mercy Watson household when my kids were little. That was always a solid read. Um, she, I, does she work with the same illustrator every time, or does she do the illustrations? I can't remember. I don't know.
No, because Mercy Watson was Chris Van Dusen.
Oh, that's right. That was the combo package. We had the Mainer and Kate. That was always
Yeah, it's
reliable.
money.
Always reliable. That's one of the best things about having kids is both Hannah and I have loved reading the middle readers, the YA stuff. You know, we read more of that than I think most adults. We try not to write it off because like some of that stuff is magic. And can't let yourself get too serious. Like I read this book, Hannah, this Celine. Do you guys know who this person is?
Only because I gave you the ARC to read.
Louis Ferdinand Céline. I don't apparently very famous like French author. Do you have either of you guys ever heard of him?
Yeah, Celine. You're referring to the French author Celine, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they have his Death on the Installment Plan is probably his biggest work, I guess. And I'd never heard of him. I'm not sad to say that. And it's a very strange book. It's like he was a Nazi collaborator and an anti-Semite. I'm not sure exactly why the French still revere him in this way. And the book is like nowadays kind of reads like freshmen in college who are trying to be racy. You know, like I think it was probably shocking when it was, you know, being written in the 1940s post-war. It's about, you know, I think he's revered for the, you know, experience of World War II and PTSD and, you know, being wounded in the war and losing your mind. And I think I read it because I was like, oh, sounds like it's important. But it was really just terrible and like full of misogyny and crass sex and like, I don't know, I read like, you know, I guess like probably has some Kerouac and some beats to it, you know, in the same way that like On the Road, like I used to think it was amazing and now I like try to get my kid to read it and then I was like, oh, actually it is kind of just gross. And so I was wondering if people knew of the, you know, they call him like you know, Philip Roth was a pretty big fan. I don't know, Steve. I'm trying to figure out why they kept publishing it. Like this guy sounds like he was bad, and this book
Yeah.
is crazy. Like, what's your opinion if you've not heard of him?
I would say that, and Jamie, I'd be interested to hear what you say. You know, cultural attitudes and mores for a long time, people just. I mean, I was thinking about Ezra Pound and, you know, any number of other artists where you look at both their work on the page and also their lives off the page, and you're like, okay, those people. The question for me is like, can we separate sort of the art they created from the life they led off the page? Because I'm not really interested in kind of who the author is off the page. I think I get it, it's marketing, etc. But I'm just like, is it a good story? And that standards around that have changed, and also just I agree with you. You can look back at, I don't know, maybe even John Updike's work, for instance.
Oh, for sure.
That's
Oh my
not
God,
sacrilege, or, you know, any of what David Foster Wallace called the great American male narcissist. Like you look at Philip Roth's work and even Saul Bella's work, and you can just see it's just shot through with misogyny. It's kind of unexamined masculine prerogative, and they're the center and they get to tell the story, and everybody else is kind of, especially the women, are in these subservient subsidiary roles. And I'm really glad that's changing. And but it's also, I mean, America's in a very strange place because there's part of the culture that's moving that direction and understanding that there are all these underrepresented voices that have stories to tell that are really disruptive. And for that reason, there's an extra sense of urgency that they finally are given a voice. And there's another faction of the culture that's just like, take us back to the Stone Age, morally and otherwise, because those voices are disruptive and they don't want their privilege and prerogative and power to be messed with. So, yeah, I mean, you know, I'd be interested to hear what Jamie has to say. But for me, part of what was exciting about being able to put a lot of examples in the book was to be able to say, okay, I don't want to get rid of Jane Austen. I love those books. Emma Woodhouse, Handsome, Clever, and Rich, is like, that's one of the best opening, you know, descriptions of a character and sort of foreshadowing of what a plot is going to be. It's incredible to teach from. But I also want to include all these other authors who are writing absolutely kick-ass work. And I don't really care about their identity off the page, but I am interested in, I don't know, like Natasha Trethewey or Megha Majumdar. Those are books that are concerned with the world as it exists now. if you want to understand what's happening in Modi's India, that novel to me is more interesting and illuminating than any number of sociological tracts or historical books. So that's exciting that those stories are starting to be told. And that means that you revisit stuff, authors like Celine or Nabokov, whoever it is, or John Updike, and you go, okay, for its time, that might have been daring, bold, revolutionary. Now we have sharper glasses and we can see that, okay, maybe there's some interesting storytelling. There's also a lot of fucked up attitudes that are sort of embedded in it.
I'm super interested in what Jamie has to say. I was a staunch, I don't care who the writer was for a long time, and I have circled around a little bit. Jamie, how much do you care who the writer is?
I mean, I do not, I don't think we should erase history. I don't think we should, I don't believe in censorship, obviously, or book burning, anything like that. But
That's solid. I'm glad you are anti-book burning.
yeah,
Coming down
controversial opinion,
strong.
I know. But I don't know, like life's like if somebody's like a terrible human being, like guess what? I have plenty of other shit to read. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I don't that's kind of it for me. Like I mean, I'm not like looking for what kind of person they are, but if somebody's telling me something really terrible, it's almost like it would be a distraction for me anyway, do you know? So there's plenty of other stuff that I can read. I mean, yeah, so that's how I feel about it. Did you guys read Monster, the Claire Dieter?
Yeah, I actually have it on my bedside table right now, but I haven't actually read it yet. But I think this is what she grapples with, right? Of like, how do we come to terms with like we love this artwork, but sometimes it's made by really bad people.
Yeah, I mean, I can't erase like what I was taught and what when I was reading in high school, like I was just being fed a steady diet of white men. So I can't, there's things that I did certainly learn from reading them, but I'm glad that I went, learned more after that and read more after that. Yeah, I don't know, but if like somebody is like, listen, if somebody's like a truly awful human being, I actually think it's okay to just be like, you know what, I'm going to skip this one. I think it's okay. I'm not, like I said, I'm not going out and looking for it, but I do pay attention to what's going on in the world. And there are just there's so many books and there's so many movies and albums and you know what I mean? Like there's so much to consume. So it's actually okay for you to say, I'm going to skip this one if you feel like it.
I think a good example of this, not that like Mark Twain was a bad dude, but I know, we struggle with how to read Huck Finn, right? Because there's, lots of racism in there. So I don't know if you have read James.
I'm reading it right now.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I freaking love that book. And I think it just helps us like think about that world in a more 360 way. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. You're
Yeah.
still reading.
I just started reading it.
But I think it's important that we get that other perspective, and it's kind of
There's
like
just so
getting the other
much.
half.
There's so much.
He does
There's
such
so
a
much to
good job,
consume.
though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I don't like, I think there's always another thing to read. There's another way to learn, or you could read something that was influenced by something and still kind of get the same work out of it, lessons out of it. So.
Well, if we're going to talk about Percival Everett, did you guys see American Fiction or read Erasure?
I saw American Fiction. Yeah.
What'd you think?
I thought it was pretty good, and then it wimped out at the end. I thought it sort of engineered quite brilliantly. I don't know the novel Erasure. It sort of engineered a moment of reckoning for this guy, and then it didn't execute on it, kind of went Hollywood on it. But I'm going to just veer away from talking about a movie because I love them too and so forth. But I also feel like we're in this sort of world of trying to get people, to like read books, and I find myself sort of falling into, in fact, I write about it in Truth is the Arrow, a lot of the reason that I think fiction, many stories that I see as a teacher start the way they do, kind of leaping into scene without any exposition. It's kind of a lot of crazy camera work, is because writers are unconsciously feeling all this anxiety about living in an age of visual storytelling. And because of show don't tell and all these mantras that are useful and helpful, but they've sort of been generalized in a way that kind of stands in for writers' inherent insecurity or anxiety that nobody's going to be interested unless they have a million brilliant adjectives, and they're immediately in some tumultuous moment. And I feel like as I've gotten older, I like just the opposite. Like, I'm so tired of starting in the middle of the action. I really love when there's a narrator who tells me what's going on and guides me through the story. And that can happen in a whole bunch of different ways, first person or third person, close and distant. But it's a bit of a, it's sort of like, I sense that people, even in the book world, are kind of overrun. Jami, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about this. I see so much student work where I can tell that the writer is scared to death that unless they're immediately performing for the reader's going to like put it down and wander off to Netflix. And it's so distressing because it's like, you should be more, I get it, and I've dealt with that same anxiety, but the person, your dream reader has picked up a book, not by mistake, not because they want to like put, make sure the table isn't tilty. Like, they picked up a book and you have to give them credit for, if you make the story worth hearing, they will stay in the story. They're not looking to wander away to a form of storytelling that's easier to consume. Do you see that, Jami? Does that make sense? I know you don't do a lot of teaching, but
I don't really ever read I don't ever read any student work at all. Sorry that my
oh my
dog is
God,
barking.
wow.
I haven't taught a workshop in, years, probably since 2020. I haven't taught a workshop. I was like, I'm done doing this. And so I decided to just focus on doing the newsletter and sharing what I knew in that way instead. And it's worked out pretty well for me. And I think it's a really positive use of my energy. I don't read student work. But I think that maybe what you're thinking about a little bit is like how people are kind of taught to, in terms of like, if they're writing towards getting published, I think it's like people are being taught that they need to have the hook in the first 5 or 10 pages.
Right.
And that's what agents are looking for, in terms of selling to like a bigger press, right? To like one of the big guys. Maybe it's different for like a smaller press. There's there's some wonderful small presses out there for sure. So and it's definitely different in Europe. When I read translated work, I'm like, oh wow, that seems so dreamy that you just took 100 pages to like get that somewhere, So yeah, I think that that's part of it. I think that people are taught to like hook the agent or the editor or the publisher and go from there. So I think that's what you're seeing a lot of. Maybe you're not teaching that, but that's like in lots of books that are out there, meaning like advice books. And if people are trying to write something that's like super commercial or even just literary commercial, that's what's going on there. So I don't know. I'm interested in that. Like, I like it when something hooks me. I like it when I get surprised though. It's like that thing where like, I want to be invested right away, but I also don't want to know how the book is going to end on page 15 too. This is why sometimes I end up only reading 50 pages. But I don't know. I don't know what the students are doing these days. You probably have your finger on the pulse more than I do.
Well, think what's that, evocation?
Yeah, do you know this book?
No.
Oh, so I was always like, because this is, I just picked it up again off the LC box. I like the cover. I love like magic books, so I'm like, oh, it's cool. It's a magic book. And this is like, they were talking, we had an agent session at the Newburyport Literary Festival yesterday in person, and they talked about how agents are looking for romantasy. And this is like,
That's it.
This is it. So this
Like,
is
that's
S.T.
it.
Gibson. I thought it was Saint Gibson for a while, but it's actually S.T. Gibson.
I
It's
think
on
her name
Angry-
is actually Saint.
No, it says S.T. two periods.
I know, but I emailed with her and
Oh,
she signed off as Saint.
okay. All right. Well, if you want to be a saint, that's cool.
I invited her to the festival for
Oh,
the
really?
romantasy panel that we had,
Oh.
and she couldn't make it.
Oh, that's a bummer. Well, it's on Angry Robot, which is a UK, imprint, and it's like everything they were talking about. Like every single scene is like they have awesome clothes and they're very pretty and they're constantly all thinking about banging each other at all times. Like, you know, they're like perusing the bookshelf and the arm brushes up against the other arm and creates lots of sexual tension. And I don't know, I was like not into it because she lives in Boston, right?
Mm-hmm.
At one point, she
Yes.
calls it Fenway Stadium, and I was like, "Oh, they must not be from Boston." But you know, I don't know. So I almost bailed because the Boston references did not seem real to me. But like, I'm strangely like I can't put it down. I just read like an hour and a half of it today, and it's like everybody is raising demons and seeing ghosts, and they're all scantily clad. And like, I get why these books are popular. You know, they read effortlessly and like there's lots of fun things happening and you know not every book has to be you know a hard-boiled serious book. You know, sometimes books are just fun too. So you know, I'm curious if you read books that like make you laugh, Steve, or if you're looking for, you know, because you're like a humor writer and I think of you as being very funny.
Yeah, yeah. I
Do you
mean,
be funny on purpose?
yeah. So there's a chapter in Truth that's about the comic impulse. And Jamie, I'm sure you feel this way too. Like, yeah, I'm a funny. Sometimes my work is funny because I'm a sad person, and that's how I learned to deal with it. And that's actually how the comic impulse works. It's a response to feeling states that are tragic. And like, I think it's funny that you're such a devout hate reader. Like the examples of books, you're like, here's a book I hated, but I can't
Oh,
stop
I'm
reading.
such a hate reader. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
well, but I mean, you know, think that there are a lot of people who are in the same boat where they're like, I can't stand this, and yet there's some part of me that needs to keep going. But yeah, I mean, I think that the kind of humor that I like, I'm thinking about Laurie Moore or Sam Lipsyte, or Vonnegut, you know, they're books that are really usually stories that are about characters who are in a lot of pain, and that's just how they dealt with it. Like that's how you deal with your adolescence, and that's how you deal with your family. Like, you know, or you look at the transcript of any great stand-up comic, or you look at any great novel about a cataclysm. You were mentioning Huck Finn, Hannah, and you could add like Catch 22 and Slaughterhouse-Five. Those are the two great books that emerged from World War II by American writers. Well, they're both comedies, and you know, I just think that's how certain people choose to deal with their unhappiness, their confusion, their moral outrage, whatever it is, rather than sort of blasting the reader with those kind of unforgiving feelings. They find a way to step back and recognize the absurdity of their circumstance. I think of it as like a form of forgiveness. When you read a great
Hmm,
comic writer, there's something elementally forgiving that's going on, at least with the stuff that lasts.
that's
And
really lovely.
yeah, I mean, that's the way it works, right? So if you think about, I don't know, you know, Aristophanes, that guy was like he was like Jon Stewart 3,000 years ago. And rather than moral outrage, he was saying, okay, I'm going to express the absurdity and hypocrisy of our political leadership and their avarice, you know, in this way it doesn't defang it. It actually allows the fool to speak honestly to the king. And that's how it feels for me. Like whenever people are laughing at something I read or I say, it's usually something really sad and depressing. And that's like the thing that's the biggest laugh. Like I had this student who years ago when I taught humor writing, I think I write about this in the book, Hannah. She she wrote this brilliant piece. She seemed very buttoned up, but I could tell from her comments in class that she was super sharp. And so during office hours, I said to her, you know, I think you should let your sense of humor, you have this great sense of humor, you should really allow it into your writing. And her last piece she wrote was this press conference delivered by Barbie. And this is, you know, obviously 20 years before the film or any of that. It was so sharp and it was so funny. And I thought, wow, she's really she's allowed that part of her personality onto the page. Like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years later, I get this lovely letter in the mail and an embossed card. So, you know, Professor Almond, this is Tracy Wigfield. I was in your humor writing class, you know, at Boston College in 2000, thus and such. And I just want to thank you your class was very helpful. I now am the lead writer for this television show, 30 Rock. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And my reaction to this as I write was like I had these two reactions. One was Jamie's reaction of like, oh my God, how beautiful, how inspiring. And then my second reaction was, I will now kill myself. Like, this is just, of course, this person is going to go on to do more important work than I'll ever do. So I feel like that's sort of just that's how we deal with it. That's how the bad stuff gets turned into bearable stuff.
I was thinking about how I had a memoir that came out a couple of years ago, and I hated the whole experience of publishing a memoir, and I don't really recommend it to anyone. And I like, but still people persist on writing memoirs, so good luck. But I just I wasn't comfortable with it. I was much more comfortable talking about novels because you can sort of hide behind it a little bit. And I also have been more comfortable talking about 1,000 words because it's not just me. There's this collective voice and a community so it's not, it's not me focused as much, but I had heard from other memoirists that give it a year and you'll sort of feel better about it all. And so I gave a reading recently in Baton Rouge. I live in New Orleans, and I did an event in Baton Rouge. And I was reading from this section of the book about what it was about when my career was really bad and like really, really bad. And I was on there's a chapter where I'm on a cross country tour, and every event that I go to, nobody knows who I am and nobody's coming to any of the events. And I do like an event at Oberlin, actually, at a college campus, and nobody buys any of my books. And so then I trade books in the parking lot for kids who make me like mix CDs. So like that seemed like a fair trade. Like that was how I could like give my book away at least, or feel like something was going on with it. And the whole time anytime I've ever read from it, it's just been like stone cold silence. And then this time that I read it, everybody was laughing. And I was like, it is funny, like it was like, I knew that it was funny. I knew that it was sad. And maybe it was like, I was reading it differently. Do you know what I mean? And I had a different energy around it so that I could sort of evoke like the tones of it a little bit more. And I could see why being a loser was funny. A little bit more.
Not at the time, but in
Not at
retrospect.
the time, but I
You
still
need
was,
some
I think,
distance.
I did think it was, I think when I wrote it, I thought it was funny. And then when I published it, it didn't feel funny. Isn't that interesting? Like you can have all these different relationships with your work. And then it took a year for me to like remember why it was funny, a year and a half or whatever, to remember why it was funny again. I just wanted to say one other thing, which is like we were talking about a little bit ago about talking about hate reading. And that is the exact opposite of how I read. That is the exact opposite. I want to be loving it. I want to be there. I want to appreciate the authors for what they're trying to do. And if I'm reading it and I'm not liking it, I just think life is too short and I'll just put it down and I won't finish it. I don't want to have a negative interaction when I'm reading. I just think I'm just trying to get as much out of it as I can. That's good. Now it seems like you are too. Do you know what I mean? In your way, like that there's like there's some sort of response you're getting out of it.
It's not negative, and hate reading isn't necessarily how I would describe it. I just think, I just love, it's whether it's music, I've reviewed music for like 20 years. And when I was reviewing music, what I would always think about is like, why did they make this decision? Like, why did they change that chord? Why is these the lyrics they wanted to sing as loud as they could? Like, why this guitar tone? Like, I hate this guitar tone, but they picked it on purpose, so what are they, how do they see it working? And I spend a lot of time thinking about like, okay, the people, because someone must dig this, right? Like, I read Kristen Hanna for the first time this year. I read it's the Vietnam book, Hannah, what's it called? Women, yes. And I couldn't figure out what it was called. It was about one
of all the things.
woman, and but so my wife was like, I can't believe you're reading it. And I read it all the way through and I enjoyed it, and I read it fast. But like I just was like, I wanted to get in the head of the people that like really love Kristen Hanna. She sells millions of books. And, you know, for me, it's like this poor woman is being tortured. She's, you know, her brother dies, and then she has a miscarriage, and then her husband dies, and then her second husband dies, and then she like falls down a set of stairs and breaks her legs, and she's an alcoholic. And I'm like, who wants to read this? It's miserable. But somebody like, you know, clearly gets something out of, you know, seeing these tragedies occur. I think that's the most interesting thing for me in reading, is trying to get into the head of the people who like love that. I don't know.
Well, I think
Yeah.
also Sam is like just a critic. So we'll be talking about books and I'll walk away being like, wow, he hated that book. And then later he's like, yeah, remember that book I loved? And I'm like, what do you mean? You seem to only
Right.
have negative things to say. But I think it's like he's always engaging with the
Mm.
books with it, which I think is a cool way to read. And I think you both probably read that way as writers too. Like, what are they doing? How are they doing it? What can I learn from this? Maybe.
The greatest lesson that I've learned in terms of being a reader for so I don't read student work, but I do read a lot of friends' work.
Mhm.
And I'm totally down with like, I don't want it to sound like I don't, you know, read things in progress, because I do. And I have friends who read my work and I read their work, and I get a lot out of doing it. But I have learned that it doesn't matter how I would write it. It's always about supporting them and figuring out the way that they need to be writing it.
Yeah. In Truth is the Arrow, I have this chapter about how I lead workshop, and it sounds very reductive, but I basically ask all the members of the workshop to write a sentence about what they take the piece to be about. Not what the piece is about, but what they think the piece is about. And then we talk about all the places where it's working the best. And then after that's done, we can offer constructive criticism, because people stop listening if you sort of lead with the negative. And that's clearly kind of what Sam does. And then Hannah thinks, oh, he hates the book. But that's not the case. He's having a complicated interaction with the book, some of which is saying, I'm trying to understand its mechanisms of enthrallment. I'm trying to get into the head of somebody who would really love this, because I have a more complicated reaction to it. And honestly, like, there's this, I don't know if you guys have read The Women Upstairs, the Claire Massoud book. It's a novel she wrote back in like 2014, and it's just a really interesting example. It's about a woman who is just full of anger. It's kind of like a Jeremiad. It's just a screed, and you come to realize over the course of the book that it's quite beautiful and devastating, but that she's really angry at herself for sort of stifling her creativity and giving her time and attention and passion away to other people rather than claiming it for herself. But when that book came out, a lot of people, critics included, this young critic asked her, she said, you know, boy, I wouldn't want to spend time with Nora. She's just so negative. She's so, and you know, and Claire Massoud just opened a bazooka on her and said, would you ever say such a thing about Raskolnikov or Svidrigaïlov or Hamlet or any of the characters in Philip Roth or any of the characters in Thomas Pynchon or she just went through this long list of despicable male characters who would never be called unlikable or difficult or negative. And to me, that book is such an example of why she says that at the end of this dressing down, you don't go to fiction to make friends. You go there to see who's alive. And
Ooh,
sometimes
good
they're
line.
alive in painful and difficult ways. And for me, it's not like I'm looking for a book that is going to sort of turn me off, but I'm turned off when I don't know what the story is, when I feel like that there's a performative aspect to it. I actually want to go to fiction to encounter characters who are having disruptive, transgressive thoughts and feelings. I think that's where you go to feel less alone with your crazy. And so I'm interested that when I hear that a character or in a workshop, somebody says, oh, I found this character relatable, or even worse, I found this character likable. To me, those are marketing words. Those are words that are about sort of like the capitalism getting in the writer's ear. And I do understand what the idea of you want to be able to understand what the character's point of view is, what their worldview is, and especially if it's difficult or if their behaviors are destructive, you're going back into those painful rooms to try to forgive everybody, to try to understand why they did the thing they did. And I like it when, and you know, this is why, I don't know, Jamie, you might have had a Dennis Johnson phase where you read Jesus' Son like 10 times in a row. I did. And, you know, those people were awful. Like he's punching his girlfriend in the stomach and he's strung out. And I mean, the characters in those stories are behaving in ways that are utterly despicable. But I love the kind of book where you go, I hate what they're doing, and I also somehow love them. Like somehow you've made me into Christ for a second, where I actually love the sinner.
I mean, I just have like a lot of I write a lot about dysfunctional families, and plenty of people tell me they relate to it.
Yeah.
So that's fine. I mean, that's the kind of relatability. I don't take it as a marketing word or as an insult if people say this, your family is as fucked up as my family.
Right.
So.
But I feel like Jamie, you too, you've had people who say like, oh, that character is
For sure.
a little unlikable or whatever.
Unlikable. Yeah. I think it's in particular, like all grown up, and also,
yes, that's what I was thinking about, because that
and
book's
also
amazing.
and also my memoir.
Oh.
I've had that experience.
Yeah, so it's fine. You can't be everything for, everyone.
Right.
Or, lots, it's somebody said what the only thing that's Chelsea Beaker just said this to me, that the only thing that is for everyone is water.
Hard to live without it.
Yeah, it seems like a good place to wrap up, because we're out of
Exactly.
time.
It's true.
And I've really enjoyed talking to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to everyone who joined us live.
Thank you all
Bye.
so much. And
Thank
should
you
you want
guys.
to hear a conversation like this in the future, you should subscribe and follow with John Updike's Ghost, or you can come see us at the Hastings House in Beverly Farms, where we're going to be talking with Rachel Slade and Jamie Sayan about their new books about organized labor and why we can't manufacture things in America anymore. And Jamie, you have one other thing to say.
Oh yeah, this year's 1,000 Words of Summer starts on June 1st. And we're doing
So
a big
soon.
launch with the New York Public Library this year, and there'll be a Zoom, and you could maybe try to sign up for it. I think it's fully booked, but we're all going to write together online, and it's going to be great. So 1,000 Words of Summer, Substack, please
Cool.
sign up.
Steve, you got anything to plug?
I'm going to talk with Kate DiCamillo tomorrow night online. Majors and Quinn, the Minneapolis indie bookstore, has put us, we read each other's books and like fanned out on one another. So I've never met her in person, but I'm going to have a conversation with her tomorrow night at, I guess, like 8 p.m. Eastern time. So people can go to my website if they want to find that, stevealmondjoy.org. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
All right, everybody. This is me wrapping up the podcast for my editor. We will see you next time.
And I'm just going to say a quick thank you as well.
Put it right over to you there, Leslie.
Yes, thanks. This is as I said at the top, this is the final event for the Literary Festival of 2024. It was a great event. We're so happy to end with such a smart conversation with such smart people. And you know what this means? You can all start looking forward to 2025. That'll be our 20th anniversary of the Newburyport Literary Festival. And we hope to see you all there, but we'll get to that later. Thank you all so much for today and for the entire weekend. It was a great success. Happy reading, and we'll see you next year.
Great to see you, Jamie.
Yeah, you too. Congrats.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. All
Bye,
right.
Hannah.